Billionaire left $250,000 cash, scattered on his bed to test his black maid. Her response left him. The morning sun poured through the tall glass windows of the luxury seaside hotel, washing the room in gold. The ocean stretched endlessly outside, calm and quiet, as if nothing unusual was about to happen. But inside one of the most expensive suites in the hotel, something unusual was being prepared. The room was filled with the kind of wealth most people would never see in their entire lives. On the large white bed lay stacks of $100 bills tied neatly with golden bands. Necklaces of pure gold, ropes of pearls, heavy bracelets and rings glittered under the light. Some were still tucked into velvet boxes, while others were carelessly spread across the bed, as if their value meant nothing. It was a scene that looked like a treasure chest had been emptied out onto the sheets. Standing near the corner of the room, a tall man in a sharp blue suit studied the display with a calm but serious face. He was the billionaire. People who knew him described him as powerful, distant, and sometimes cold. He had built his empire with sharp decisions and a mind that rarely trusted anyone. To the outside world, he seemed to have everything: money, influence, respect. But inside, he lived with a deep suspicion. He had seen too many people fail when temptation was placed in front of them. Business partners, old friends, even some employees he once trusted, had all shown their true colors when money was involved. Over time, the billionaire had come to believe that honesty was a rare treasure, rarer even than gold. That morning, he had decided to run a test. The maid assigned to clean his room was a woman he had noticed over the past week. She was quiet, polite, and always carried herself with dignity. Her name was Grace. She never complained, never looked for shortcuts, and never asked questions that were not necessary. Yet the billionaire wondered, was her goodness real? Or was it just a mask, the way so many people wore masks around him? To find out, he had left a fortune on his bed. He wanted to see what Grace would do when temptation stared her in the face. The door clicked softly. Grace entered the room with her cleaning cart, unaware of the trap waiting inside. She was dressed in her usual uniform, her hair neatly tied back under her cap. She greeted the room the way she always did, with a little nod to herself, as if preparing for another day of honest work. But then she stopped. Her eyes fell on the bed, and in an instant her breath caught in her chest. She froze where she stood, her hands gripping the handle of the cart. For a long moment she could not move. Her mind tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Stacks of money, more than she could count, were lying in front of her. Jewelry that sparkled with a light of its own covered the sheets. Grace's heart began to pound. She had never in her life been this close to such wealth. She took a small step forward, almost as if drawn by invisible strings. Her lips parted, her eyes wide. She whispered to herself, "My God." Behind her, in the shadow of the curtain, the billionaire watched silently. His face showed no emotion, but inside he was alert. This was the moment. Would she fall into temptation like so many before her? Grace slowly raised her hands and pressed them over her mouth. Her body trembled with shock. In her mind, pictures flashed quickly. Her children at home, her unpaid bills, the rent that was always too high, the long nights when she had to choose between food for the table or medicine for her son's cough. The money in front of her could solve everything. One stack alone could pay off her debts. 2 stacks could cover her children's school fees for years. The jewelry could be sold quietly and no one would ever know. With this wealth, she could finally stop cleaning rooms, stop breaking her back for a living that never seemed enough. For a moment, Grace closed her eyes. The temptation was real. Her heart argued with her mind, and her body stood frozen between 2 roads. One road led to easy riches, the other to honesty and hardship. When she opened her eyes again, they were wet. She shook her head slowly, whispering, "It is not mine." Taking a deep breath, she straightened her back. She pushed her cart closer to the bed, careful not to disturb the stacks of money. She picked up her cleaning cloth and began her work, wiping the tables, dusting the lamps, arranging the curtains. She did not touch the bed. She would not even brush against it, but her eyes every so often betrayed her. They flickered back to the mountain of money. Her body longed for it. Her hands, rough and tired from years of work, twitched slightly as if they wanted to feel the smooth paper of the bills. Yet each time the desire rose, she fought it down with the strength of her values. "This is not mine," she repeated silently, like a prayer. The billionaire studied her carefully. She'd been standing there for almost 10 minutes now, long enough to make a choice. Most people would have given in already. But Grace surprised him. Finally, she moved to the bed. Her cleaning routine demanded that she fix the sheets. She stopped again, looking at the money. She hesitated. Then, with the care of someone handling glass, she adjusted only the corners of the bedspread, making sure not a single bill shifted out of place. Her hands trembled as she tucked in the sheets, but her resolve did not. Once the bed was neat, she stepped back, exhaled deeply, and wiped her forehead. She looked at the money one last time, then turned her back to it and continued cleaning. When she finished, Grace stood at the door with her cleaning cart. She gave the room one final glance, her eyes soft but firm. Then she stepped out, closing the door quietly behind her. The billionaire remained still in the corner, his eyes fixed on the closed door. For the first time in a long while, he felt something stir inside him. Respect. The test was not over yet. But Grace had already shown more honesty than most people he had met in his entire life. And as he stood there, alone in the room filled with wealth, the billionaire realized something he had almost forgotten. Character was the one treasure money could never buy. Grace walked down the long hotel corridor with her cart, her thoughts heavy and her steps slower than usual. The sight of the bed covered in money and jewelry stayed in her mind like a vivid picture she could not erase. Her chest still ached from the pounding of her heart. She had left the room without touching a single dollar, but the temptation had been so strong that she felt almost guilty for even thinking about it. As she pushed the cart, she whispered to herself again, "It was not mine. It was never mine." Those words calmed her, but they also reminded her of the life she lived, one where money was always the missing piece, one where she had learned to live without so many things that others took for granted. Grace's life had never been easy. She was born in a small town where opportunity was rare, and hardship was the language everyone spoke. Her parents had worked hard but never had much. Her father drove trucks, sometimes disappearing for weeks on the road, and her mother cleaned houses just as Grace would one day do. They lived in a modest home with peeling paint and creaky floors, but they lived with dignity. Her mother used to tell her, "We may not have money, Grace, but we have pride. No one can take that from us unless we give it away." Those words had carried Grace through many storms in her life, though sometimes they felt more like heavy weights than guiding lights. She married young, believing in love and dreaming of a family that would grow together, but the man she married left her after a few years, leaving her alone with 2 small children to raise. He had promised forever, but forever had lasted only until the responsibility grew too heavy for him. Grace remembered the night he left, the silence in the house, the tears she tried to hide from her children, the weight of realizing she would have to carry everything alone. From that moment, her life became a constant struggle to balance survival with hope. Every day was about sacrifice. If there were 3 apples, the children ate them and Grace went without. If there was money for either new shoes for her daughter or a doctor's appointment for herself, she chose the shoes. She wore the same uniform until the threads wore thin, patched the holes in her shoes with glue, and kept her hair tied back neatly, because she wanted her children to believe she was strong, even when she felt weak. Her mornings began before sunrise. She would rise quietly, prepare breakfast, and pack small lunches for her children. Then she would walk them to school, holding their hands tightly as if her grip alone could protect them from the world. After that, she would head to the hotel where she worked long hours cleaning room after room, each one demanding the same attention to detail. She scrubbed floors, wiped mirrors, made beds, and emptied trash bins, often without a single word of thanks from the guests. But Grace never complained. Work was work, and it was what allowed her children to eat and learn. Evenings were her favorite, though they were often exhausting. She would return home, help with homework, cook dinner, and tell stories before bed. Her children were too young to understand the weight of her sacrifices, but their laughter was enough to keep her going. They would run to her when she came through the door, wrapping their arms around her waist, filling her heart with the kind of love that no hardship could take away. Yet beneath the love and the smiles, the worries never left her. Rent was always due. The electricity bill came every month like a shadow. School fees, uniforms, supplies, they were endless needs in a life that always demanded more than she could give. There were nights when she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she would ever escape the cycle of just barely making it. She dreamed of a day when she would not have to choose between paying for medicine or buying food. A day when her children could dream bigger than she ever dared to. Still, even in her hardest moments, Grace held on to her values. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her that pride and honesty were her true possessions. She had seen others fall into desperation and take paths that led to regret. She promised herself she would never do that. Her children deserved to grow up with a mother they could respect, not one who gave up her integrity for a shortcut. That was why the sight of the money on the bed had shaken her so deeply. It was not just temptation. It was a mirror of everything she lacked, everything she had wished for in the quiet moments of despair. To walk away from it had taken strength she did not even know she had. But Grace knew in her heart that walking away was the only choice she could live with. She remembered her son's smile when he told her he wanted to be a doctor one day, to help people the way his school nurse had helped him during his last asthma attack. She remembered her daughter's excitement when she drew pictures of houses with gardens, promising her mother that one day she would buy her one. Grace's sacrifices were not for herself. They were for the future her children believed in. Taking money that was not hers would only teach them that honesty could be traded for comfort. She refused to give them that lesson. On her way home that evening, Grace stopped at the small grocery store near her apartment. She picked up bread, milk, and a few vegetables, counting every dollar in her hand before placing them on the counter. It was not much, but it was enough for dinner and tomorrow's breakfast. As she walked home with the bag in her hand, she felt tired but proud. She had faced a test that could have broken her values, and she had walked away unchanged. At home, her children rushed to her as they always did. Her daughter hugged her tightly and asked about her day, while her son showed her a drawing he had made at school. Grace smiled, kissed their foreheads, and felt her heart soften. They were the reason she stayed strong. They were the reason she chose honesty over temptation. They were the treasure she protected. Late that night, after the children were asleep, Grace sat quietly by the window. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and the hum of life outside filled the silence. She thought about the billionaire's room, about the way the money had glowed under the sun. She wondered why anyone would leave such wealth lying out in the open, but she also knew it was not her place to question. Her place was here, in her small apartment, with the love of her children and the quiet strength of knowing she had done the right thing. She whispered softly, "One day, things will be better. But I will not lose myself to get there." What Grace did not know was that her life was already changing. The billionaire she had unknowingly been tested by had seen everything. He had witnessed her struggle, her hesitation, and her final decision to walk away. And in his heart, a decision of his own was forming, one that would soon turn Grace's life upside down in ways she never imagined. The next morning, Grace walked into the hotel with her usual calm expression, her uniform neat and pressed, though the weight of yesterday's memory still sat quietly in her chest. She tried to push it away, telling herself it was just another day, just another room to clean, but the image of that bed overflowing with cash and jewelry kept coming back to her. It felt unreal, almost like a dream. But she knew it had been real because she had touched the corners of the sheet, careful not to disturb a single bill. She had walked away from it, and though it had been hard, she had done the right thing. Grace pushed her cart slowly toward the upper floors, her thoughts drifting between her children at home and the routine waiting ahead. What she did not know was that the billionaire had been thinking about her all night. After she had left his suite the day before, he had sat in silence, staring at the untouched fortune on his bed. He thought about all the people who had failed him in the past, about the betrayals and the lies, and he realized that this woman, this quiet maid, had more honesty than men who sat at polished tables in expensive offices. That realization made him restless. He wanted to see more. He wanted to be sure. And so he planned to watch her again. When Grace entered his room that day, she felt her breath catch in her throat. The money was still there. The jewelry was still shining across the sheets, untouched, unmoved, as if time itself had stopped since yesterday. Her knees weakened for a moment, but she steadied herself quickly. She knew now that this was not an accident. No guest, not even a billionaire, would leave such treasure out in the open for 2 days. This was deliberate. She whispered under her breath, "It is a test." Her heart raced as the weight of that thought settled in. A test of what? Her honesty? Her willpower? Grace's hands trembled as she picked up her cleaning cloth. She reminded herself again of who she was, of what her children meant to her, of the pride her mother had taught her to carry like a shield. Still, the temptation rose in her chest stronger than before because now she knew this was no mistake. The money was placed there for her to see. It was almost as if someone was daring her to take it. She moved about the room slowly, dusting the furniture, fixing the curtains, wiping the mirrors, each movement deliberate and controlled. Her eyes avoided the bed as much as possible, but it was like trying not to notice the sun. The glow of the gold and the sharp green of the bills pulled at her, whispered to her, promised her everything she had ever wanted. For a brief moment she imagined herself picking up one stack and sliding it into her apron pocket. No one would notice, she thought. Just one stack would change everything. She could pay her rent for months, maybe move into a better apartment, buy her daughter the shoes she had been asking for, buy her son the books he needed. No one would have to know. But then another image came, stronger than the first. Her children's eyes, bright with innocence, looking at her with trust. Her son telling her he wanted to be a doctor. Her daughter promising to buy her a house one day. What would happen to that trust if she betrayed it? What lesson would she pass on if she chose the easy path? Grace closed her eyes for a moment, gripping the cloth tightly in her hands. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. She whispered again, more firmly this time, "It is not mine." Behind the curtain, the billionaire watched her closely. His heart, which was usually so cold and calculating, beat faster with every second. He had expected her to fail this time, expected her to give in to the pressure. He was prepared to see her pocket the money, to see her greed overpower her dignity. But what he saw instead shook him. She resisted. Again. Her face showed the battle within her, the longing, the struggle, but her hands never moved toward the fortune. She kept working with honesty, even as temptation burned in her eyes. The room was silent except for the soft sounds of her cleaning. Grace did not know she was being watched. She believed she was alone, and that made her actions even more powerful. Integrity, the billionaire realized, was not about what you did when people were watching. It was about what you did when no one was. And this woman, this maid, was proving that to him in the simplest, most undeniable way. As Grace finished her work, she stood for a long moment at the door. Her eyes went back to the bed, to the money and the jewelry. She could not help but look. But her gaze was not greedy. It was heavy, thoughtful, almost sad. She shook her head gently as if to push away the last flicker of temptation, then turned the handle and walked out quietly, leaving the fortune untouched once more. The billionaire stepped out from behind the curtain, his chest rising with a deep breath. For the first time in years, he felt something break through the armor he had built around himself. Respect, admiration, even a kind of hope he had almost forgotten. He looked at the bed, then at the door through which Grace had just left, and he knew this was not the end. He needed to understand her more. He needed to know the story behind the strength he had just witnessed. That evening, Grace returned home tired but calm. She served her children dinner, listened to their stories, and tucked them into bed. As she kissed them goodnight, she felt a strange peace inside her, though she could not explain why. Maybe it was because she had passed the test again, though she still did not fully understand why it was happening. She only knew she had done the right thing, and that was enough. Little did she know that the billionaire was no longer just testing her. He was planning something bigger, something that would soon reveal itself and change the course of her life forever. The following day began like any other for Grace, but in truth, everything had already started to change. She did not know it, but the billionaire had made up his mind to watch her again. He wanted to see if her honesty was consistent, or if it was only luck that had guided her choices before. For him, money was a weapon and a measure of truth. He had used it countless times to uncover people's real faces, but rarely had he been surprised the way he was with Grace. The test he set up once, then twice, was not enough for him. He wanted to be sure, and so once again, he left the bed covered with riches that could feed 100 families, and once again, he positioned himself quietly in the room, hidden where she would not see him. Grace walked into the suite that morning with her cart, unaware of the watchful eyes studying her. She had thought about the strange sight all night, wondering why such wealth had been left unattended for so long. In her heart, she had already guessed it was a test, though she could not understand why anyone would test her. She was just a maid, Just a woman who worked to feed her children. No one important enough to attract such attention. And yet, the sight of the untouched fortune waiting again made her certain that there was more to this than carelessness. Her breath quickened as she closed the door behind her. The room was quiet. Only the soft hum of the ocean breeze outside the glass. The bed gleamed like a trap in plain sight. The bills stacked like walls, the jewelry glittering like sparks of fire. Grace's pulse raced as she set her hands firmly on the handle of the cart. She whispered to herself as though reciting scripture. Not mine. Not mine. The billionaire's eyes narrowed from his hidden corner. He saw the stiffness in her shoulders, the tremor in her hands, the flicker of temptation in her gaze. But he also saw the fight. She was not blind to the wealth. She was not numb to the hunger it stirred inside her. She saw it, felt it, struggled against it, and still she chose to turn away. He had tested powerful businessmen before, men who stood in front of cameras and promised the world their honesty. He had placed temptations before them and watched them crumble within seconds. Watched them pocket what was not theirs with no hesitation. But here was a woman who had every reason to take the money, poverty, children, endless struggles, and yet she resisted with the dignity of someone who valued her soul more than her comfort. Grace began her cleaning. She dusted the lamps, wiped the tables, and straightened the chairs. Her movements were calm but tense, as though her body remembered the temptation, even if her mind rejected it. Every now and then her eyes betrayed her, glancing at the bed, then darting away quickly as though she feared her gaze alone might betray her honesty. When she reached the bed, she froze again. She could not avoid it forever. The sheets needed to be fixed, the pillows fluffed, the surface made neat. But the bed was no longer just a bed. It was a battlefield where her conscience and her desperation wrestled. She swallowed hard, steadying herself, then carefully adjusted the edges of the sheets without touching a single bill. Her hands moved like they were made of glass, trembling but steady, careful but brave. She placed the pillows upright, smoothed the fabric, and stepped back. The mountain of wealth remained undisturbed, untouched, left exactly as she had found it. Behind her, the billionaire felt something stir that he had not felt in a long time. It was not just respect this time. It was wonder. How could someone with so little carry so much strength? How could someone with every reason to give in still choose to walk away? He studied her face, her posture, her quiet determination, and in that moment he realized he was not just testing her anymore. He was learning from her. Grace continued working until the room shone with order. Then she paused by the window, gazing out at the ocean. She let herself breathe for a moment, the salt air calming her nerves. In her silence, she thought about her children. She imagined her son laughing at the dinner table, her daughter singing to herself while drawing pictures. Their faces gave her strength, the kind of strength that reminded her why she walked away from temptation every time. She wanted them to be proud of her. She wanted them to grow up believing in honesty, even when the world offered shortcuts. Finally, she pushed her cart to the door. She gave the room one last look, not at the bed this time, but at the space as a whole, making sure her work was complete. Then she stepped outside, closing the door softly behind her. The billionaire stood in silence for a long while after she left. His eyes stayed on the untouched money, then drifted to the door where she had disappeared. He felt a heaviness in his chest, not the kind that brought discomfort, but the kind that filled him with a strange new respect for humanity. For years he had believed that money exposed everyone. The greed was the true nature of people. But Grace was different. She was proving him wrong again and again, and with every test she passed, the wall of cynicism he had built around himself began to crack. That night, Grace returned home as she always did, carrying groceries in one hand, holding her daughter's hand in the other. She cooked, she listened, she laughed, she tucked her children into bed. To her, nothing had changed, but to the billionaire, everything had. He had witnessed honesty in its purest form, not in speeches or promises, but in quiet choices made when no one was supposed to be watching. What he did not know yet was how deeply her example would begin to affect him. She was just a maid in his hotel suite, but her character was shaking the very foundation of his beliefs. And though she had no idea, the eyes that followed her silently were already planning the next step. A step that would soon turn their two worlds into one story neither of them could forget. The next morning, Grace woke up to the sound of her alarm. The same tired ringing she had heard for years, but her body felt heavier than usual. She had not slept well. Her dreams had been filled with strange images, Stacks of money, glittering jewelry, her children's faces shifting in and out of the picture, and always that feeling of being tested. She sat at the edge of her bed, rubbed her hands across her face, and whispered a prayer for strength. Then she rose, prepared breakfast for her children, and left for another day of work, her steps steady but her heart full of questions. At the hotel, she pushed her cart down the hallway, nodding politely to guests and staff. When she reached the Billionaire suite, her breath caught before she even touched the door handle. She already knew what she would see inside. The money would be there again, waiting for her like a silent temptation. But what she did not know was that today everything would be different. Today the silence would break. She unlocked the door and entered quietly, just as she had every other day. And there it was, the fortune spread across the bed, shining under the sunlight that streamed through the glass windows. She froze as always, her heart thumping against her ribs. But this time something was different. Before she could move further into the room, a voice startled her. "Why did you not take it?" Grace jumped, nearly dropping her cleaning cloth. Her eyes darted across the room until they landed on the figure of the billionaire, stepping out from behind the curtain, where he had been watching her for days. For a moment she could not speak. Her mouth went dry, her pulse raced, and a wave of fear swept through her. Had she done something wrong? Was this some kind of trick to accuse her of theft she never committed? She stammered, her voice trembling. "I do not understand." The billionaire walked slowly toward the bed, his eyes never leaving her. His face was calm, unreadable, but his gaze carried weight. He gestured toward the bed with one hand. "All of this. It was left here. You saw it. Anyone else would have taken at least some of it. But you did not. Why?" Grace's throat tightened. She looked at the bed, then at him, then back down at the floor. Her hands twisted the cloth nervously. "Because it is not mine," she whispered. The billionaire tilted his head, studying her closely. "Not yours," he repeated, almost as if testing the words on his tongue. "You mean to say even when no one was watching, you refused?" Grace lifted her chin slightly, though her body was shaking. "Yes," she said softly. "I have nothing, but I still have my pride. If I take what is not mine, then what lesson do I give to my children? They look to me. They believe in me. I cannot betray that." Her voice broke at the last words, and her eyes glistened with tears she had tried to hold back. For the first time, she felt the weight of her own honesty pressing against her chest, heavier than the temptation had been. The billionaire's face softened in a way it had not for years. For so long he had lived in a world where trust was a rare currency, where betrayal came quicker than loyalty. He had believed money revealed the truth of people, and the truth was almost always ugly. But here stood a woman with every reason to give in, and still she chose the harder road. For the first time he was not looking at money. He was looking at character. He stepped closer and said quietly, "Do you know who I am?" Grace shook her head. "No, sir. You are a guest, and I am here to do my work." "I am not just a guest," he said. His voice carried a weight that filled the room. "I am the one who left this money here. I am the one who watched you. This was no accident. It was a test." Her eyes widened. She stumbled back slightly, gripping the edge of her cart. "A test?" she whispered. "Yes," he said firmly. "I wanted to see the truth of the people around me. And you, Grace, have shown me more truth than I ever expected." She stood frozen, her heart pounding. Her name on his lips startled her. How did he know her name? She had never introduced herself, never spoken more than a few polite words in his presence. He saw her confusion and smiled faintly. "I know more than you think. I asked about you. The staff told me who you are, how long you have worked here, how hard you work. I know you have 2 children. I know you live a life of sacrifice, and yet you never touched a single dollar. Tell me, Grace, why?" Her lips trembled as she answered, "Because my children deserve a mother they can respect. Because if I lose my honesty, I lose everything that matters." The room went quiet after her words. The billionaire looked at her for a long moment, his eyes heavy with something she could not read. Then slowly he nodded. "You are stronger than most people I know." Grace shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No, sir. I am just a mother trying to raise my children right. That is all." The billionaire studied her tears, her trembling hands, and her quiet strength. Something inside him shifted that day. For years he had measured people by what they would take from him. But for the first time he saw someone defined not by what she took, but by what she refused to take. And that, to him, was more valuable than all the money on the bed. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Grace, you have passed the test, but now it is my turn. You have shown me honesty. It is time I show you gratitude. Grace blinked at him, not understanding. Gratitude? From a billionaire to a maid? The thought felt impossible. She shook her head quickly. I do not need gratitude, sir. I only need to do my job. But the billionaire smiled faintly. No, you need more than that. And I intend to give it to you. Her chest tightened with confusion and fear, but before she could ask more, he turned back toward the bed. He gathered the stacks of bills into his arms, lifted the jewelry boxes, and then looked at her. This money, this gold, it is meaningless compared to what you have shown me. But today it has meaning. Today it is for you. Grace's knees nearly buckled. She shook her head furiously, backing away. No, I cannot. This is not mine. He stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. It is yours now. You have proven what most cannot. You are honest when no one is watching, and that is worth more than wealth. This is not payment for work. This is recognition of who you are. Tears streamed down her face. She could barely breathe. Her hands shook as she held them up in refusal, but her heart beat wildly with the possibility of a new life. She thought of her children, their dreams, their hopes, their laughter. She thought of the hunger she had carried for years, the nights of worry, the endless sacrifices. For the first time, she saw a door opening. The billionaire placed the money gently on the table beside her and said softly, Take it, Grace, not because you wanted it, but because you earned it with your honesty. Her lips trembled and she whispered, Why me? He looked into her eyes, and for once his voice carried no coldness, only truth. Because you reminded me that honesty still exists. Because you reminded me that not everything can be bought. The room was silent again, but this silence was different. It was not heavy with temptation, but filled with possibility. Grace stood trembling, her heart torn between disbelief and hope. And in that moment she realized her life had just changed forever. Grace stood frozen, staring at the table where the billionaire had placed the stacks of money and the glittering jewelry. Her heart was pounding so loudly that she could almost hear it echoing in the quiet suite. For years she had dreamed of a way out of her struggles, of a miracle that could change the direction of her life, but never once had she thought it would come like this, not as a gift, not as a reward. She shook her head again, stepping back slightly as if the sight of the wealth was dangerous. I cannot take it, she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of disbelief. I did nothing to deserve this. I'm only doing my job. The billionaire studied her carefully, his sharp eyes softer than they had been in years. That is where you are wrong, Grace, he said quietly. You did more than your job. You showed me honesty when no one else has. You passed a test that most people in my world would have failed in seconds. You chose integrity over wealth. That is rare. That is priceless, and that deserves to be honored. Grace's tears slid down her face, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. She thought about her children, their laughter, their dreams, their endless needs. She thought about the unpaid bills waiting at home, the empty spaces in her kitchen cupboard, the patched clothes in her drawers. The money on that table could erase all of it in an instant. Yet still she hesitated, afraid that taking it would somehow undo the very honesty she had been protecting all along. I cannot, she said again, shaking her head. If I take it, then maybe it means I wanted it all along. Maybe it means I failed the test. The billionaire stepped closer, his voice firm but kind. No, Grace, you passed because you walked away when you did not know I was watching. You passed because temptation stared you in the face and you refused. Taking this now is not failure. It is recognition. You earned this not by greed but by restraint. Do you understand? Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to believe him, but her whole life had been built on survival, not gifts. She was not used to generosity, not used to receiving anything without a cost attached. Seeing her struggle, the billionaire sighed and sat down on the edge of the bed. He leaned forward, his hands clasped, his voice quieter now. Do you know how many people I have tested? Friends, partners, even family. Almost all of them failed. They took what was not theirs, thinking I would never know. I have lived surrounded by greed, Grace. I built my fortune by understanding people's weaknesses. But you reminded me that honesty still exists. You gave me something no money could buy, and now I want to give back. Not to repay you, to honor you. Grace's chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She had been invisible for so long, just another maid in a uniform, another worker in the background of wealthy lives. And now here was a man who had the world at his feet, telling her that her honesty mattered, that her character was worth more than gold. Her eyes filled again, and she covered her face with her hands. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Say nothing," the billionaire replied gently. "Just accept it. Accept it for yourself. Accept it for your children. Let them see what honesty has given you." At the mention of her children, something shifted inside Grace. She pictured her son coughing in the night because she could not afford better medicine. She pictured her daughter walking to school with shoes that pinched her toes because they were too small. She pictured their little faces lighting up whenever she managed to bring home something extra, even something small like a sweet or a toy. Her children deserved better. They deserved a chance. And maybe this was the chance she had been waiting for. Slowly, Grace lowered her hands and looked at the table again. The money no longer looked like temptation. It looked like possibility. A door opening where before there had only been walls. She stepped closer, her legs trembling beneath her, and reached out as though touching something unreal. Her fingers brushed the smooth paper of the bills, and she drew in a sharp breath. The billionaire watched her carefully, his eyes calm. "Take it," he said softly. "It is yours." With tears streaming down her face, Grace nodded slowly. She gathered the stacks into her hands, her body shaking under the weight of the moment. She held them to her chest like they were not just money, but hope itself. Then she turned to him, her voice breaking. "Thank you. Thank you, sir. I do not know how to repay you." "You already did," he said simply. "You repaid me with honesty. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever, faith in people. That is enough." For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence, the billionaire with his calm, steady gaze, and Grace with tears shining in her eyes. It was as if the room itself understood the weight of the moment, the quiet power of honesty being recognized, of dignity being rewarded. Later that day, when Grace returned home, her children noticed something different in her face. She smiled more freely, her steps lighter, her voice warmer. She hugged them tightly, almost too tightly, as if she never wanted to let them go. They did not yet know what had happened, but they could feel it, that something had changed. Grace sat at the dinner table that night and looked at her children's faces glowing in the soft light. She thought of the billionaire's words, of the money now safe in her bag, of the possibilities that had suddenly bloomed in her life. And though fear still lingered, fear of change, fear of the unknown, there was also a new strength. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that her sacrifices were not in vain, that her honesty had not gone unnoticed. The billionaire, too, sat in his suite that night, staring at the now empty bed. The money was gone, but in its place was something far greater. A lesson, a reminder. He had wealth beyond measure, but it had taken a maid with nothing to show him what true richness looked like. He realized then that the reward he had given Grace was not only for her, it was for him too. Because in giving it, he had found a piece of himself that had been missing for years. The days that followed moved slowly for Grace, though each one felt like stepping into a new life she had never dared to imagine. The money sat neatly in a locked drawer in her small apartment, untouched for the moment, but its presence changed everything. She woke each morning with a different kind of peace, no longer consumed by the endless worry of whether she could make it to the end of the week. When she looked at her children, she no longer saw only their needs, she saw their futures. For the first time in years, she could dream alongside them. Her son asked her one evening if she thought he could really become a doctor, and instead of giving him the vague smile she always gave when she did not know how to answer, she looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Yes, you will be." The certainty in her voice surprised even her, but she knew now it was possible. Her daughter, too, began drawing houses with wide gardens and colorful flowers, and Grace felt her heart swell knowing that the dream might one day be more than just crayon lines on paper. Yet even as she planned quietly, she never boasted, never showed the money to anyone, and never let her pride change. Grace remained the same woman who woke up before dawn, cooked breakfast for her children, and walked into the hotel with her head held high. If anyone noticed a new light in her smile or a softer ease in her steps, they did not comment on it. She carried her secret gently, knowing it was not the money itself that mattered, but the reason it had come to her. The billionaire, meanwhile, found himself thinking of Grace far more than he expected. For years, his life had been about numbers, deals, and strategies. Trust had been a rare commodity, and he had surrounded himself with contracts and lawyers to protect against betrayal. But now he found himself replaying her words over and over in his mind. "It is not mine. If I lose my honesty, I lose everything that matters." The simplicity of those words carried more truth than any boardroom speech he had ever heard. He began to look at his own world differently. At meetings, he watched his partners more closely, not their wealth, but their character. He listened for honesty in their voices, measured not just their words, but their actions. And slowly he realized that the empire he had built might have been large, but it had been built on fragile ground, on people who valued money more than integrity. Grace had reminded him of something he had forgotten, that real strength was not in wealth but in values that could not be bought. One evening, he invited Grace to meet him in the hotel garden. She came nervously, unsure of why he had called for her. The garden was quiet, the flowers swaying gently in the night air, the fountain bubbling softly in the background. He stood waiting by the benches, his sharp suit immaculate as always, but his eyes warmer than she had ever seen them. "Grace," he said when she approached, "I wanted to see you not as a maid, but as the woman who taught me a lesson." She blinked in surprise, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "I do not know what lesson I could teach you, sir. You are a man of the world. I am only a mother trying to survive." He shook his head gently. "No, you're more than that. You showed me that honesty is still alive. You showed me that not everything has a price. And that lesson, Grace, is worth more than the millions I have in the bank." Her lips parted, but no words came. She lowered her eyes, humbled by the weight of his words. He continued, his voice steady. "I want the world to know your story. Not because of me, not because of the money, but because people need to see that integrity is still possible. They need to see that even when life is hard, it is better to hold on to honesty than to trade it away." Grace shook her head quickly, fear flickering in her eyes. "No, sir. I do not want attention. I do not want people to look at me differently. I only want to raise my children in peace." The billionaire studied her, then nodded slowly. "I understand, and I will respect that. But even if the world does not hear it, I will never forget it. You changed me, Grace. And because of you, I will change the way I live, the way I do business, the way I see people." Grace's throat tightened with emotion. She had never imagined that her simple choice to walk away from temptation would ripple so far, would reach into the heart of a man who had everything. She realized then that honesty was not just for herself or her children. It was a light that could guide others too, even those who lived in a world so different from hers. As time passed, Grace used the money carefully, never recklessly. She paid off her debts, moved her family into a safer home, and ensured her children's education was secured. She did not buy luxuries or waste it on things that did not matter. Every dollar was spent with thought, with gratitude, with the knowledge that it represented something far greater than wealth. It represented her integrity being honored. Her children grew, thriving in ways she had once only dreamed of. Her son studied with determination, his eyes set firmly on the future he wanted to build. Her daughter found joy in her art, painting brighter and bigger dreams on her canvases. And Grace herself carried on with the same quiet strength, still working, still giving, still living with the dignity that had brought her here. The billionaire, true to his word, changed too. He began to invest not only in businesses but in people who showed character, not just ambition. He funded schools, supported families, and built programs that rewarded honesty and hard work. He told himself he did it because of Grace, because her example had shown him the kind of legacy worth leaving behind. Years later, when Grace looked back on that moment in the hotel room, the bed covered in money, the silent eyes watching her, the choice she made, she realized that it had been more than a test. It had been a turning point, a crossroads where temptation could have led her down one path, but honesty had opened another. And that choice had not only changed her life, but touched the life of the man who had tested her, and through him, many others she would never even meet. The world never knew her name, but her story lived quietly in the lives she touched, in her children, who grew up knowing that honesty mattered more than shortcuts, in the billionaire who carried her lesson into boardrooms and projects and communities, and in herself every time she looked in the mirror and saw not just a maid, Not just a struggling mother, but a woman who had proven to herself and to others that values were stronger than temptation. The lesson was simple, but it was powerful. True wealth is not measured by the money in your hands, but by the honesty in your heart. And Grace, the woman who had once lived with nothing, carried that wealth with her for the rest of her days.